Terrorism is alive and well, improving preparedness and counter-terrorism efforts for emerging threats in 2025 and beyond.
I just want to clarify, you are 100% certain that there are 1,000 plus Al-Qaeda trained fighters within the United States borders?
Well, Al-Qaeda says they trained and deployed 1,000 for this attack. First off, I think there's more than 1,000 Al-Qaeda members in the United States. Do you know as Al-Qaeda trained and sent 1,000 attackers?
1,000 attackers. When did they come through?
So they finished training and they deployed them. Now, depending on how they come through, it could take different times, right? So the fastest I've seen an Afghan leave Afghanistan and get over the border illegally is about 3 weeks.
Recent intelligence coming from the private sectors indicate terrorist attacks mimicking the 2008 Mumbai attacks and the October 7th Israel attacks inside the United States. Some have said that these attacks could begin in 2025. This presentation is to make you aware of the threats and to improve our preparedness and response out in the field if an attack happens in San Diego.
So the U.S., from what we've seen, I told you about the camps, right? That there's the advanced urban warfare. So we think it's going to look like October 7th, but it's actually based on, and October 7th was probably also based on it. It's based on the Mumbai attacks that occurred 15 years ago.
Mumbai was a low-tech, high-impact attack. Terrorists armed with only semi-automatic weapons, grenades, and bombs hit multiple civilian targets in quick succession. Back in 2008, as they watched the carnage, the chaos, the 60-hour siege, some U.S. police officials had this thought.
We're not ready for that specific type of attack, especially on soft targets.
Los Angeles and New York immediately dispatched personnel to India to learn all they could. There was one big takeaway.
You have to put the threat down immediately, and you have to run toward the fire, not away from it.
Mumbai consisted of 10 attackers divided into 4 teams. There were 172 killed and 300 injured. Each team carried an AK-47 style rifle with 730 round magazines, 9mm handgun, and 8 to 10 hand grenades. Team 1 consisted of 2 attackers targeting a hospital and train station. Their objective was to indiscriminately shoot civilians. This small team of 2 were responsible for 57 fatalities. Team 2 consisted of 2 attackers targeting a Chabad Jewish center. Their objective was to take hostages and target Jewish individuals. The attackers killed 8 before being killed. Team 3 consisted of 2 attackers targeting a hotel. Their objective was to attack foreigners and take hostages to prolong the attack. The attackers killed 30 and were ultimately killed after a 17-hour standoff. Team 4 consisted of 4 attackers targeting the Taj Mahal Hotel and local cafe. Their objective was to create mass casualties at the cafe and engage in a prolonged attack inside the iconic hotel. They killed 10 inside the cafe and engaged commandos for 60 hours, setting fires and moving constantly to delay responders. This attack struck different locations at the same time, creating confusion and stretching law enforcement resources.
19 days since the worst terror attack in Israeli history, its leaders are trying to frame the stakes, today laying bare the brutality in graphic detail. Here's Raf Sanchez.
It felt like there couldn't possibly be new horror left to see. No brutality that hadn't already been shared or live-streamed. For 46 minutes, we sat in stunned silence, watching video filmed by Hamas and filmed by their victims. Much of it had never been seen before. And while Israel's military is not releasing the clips because they're so graphic, they allowed us to describe what we saw. The military released this video from a Hamas dashcam exclusively to NBC News, saying it shows a terrorist using a heavy machine gun to mow down survivors fleeing from the Supernova Music Festival.
The October 7th attack consisted of approximately 1,500 attackers from Hamas breaching the border. Once the border was breached, they broke up into smaller groups. The attackers targeted civilian and military locations, 2 music festivals, and a beach party. 1,200 people were killed, including 46 Americans, and more than 250 were taken as hostages.
Resulted in that basically a massacre at a outdoor concert.
Yep.
You know, young people hiding in bunkers with grenades rolled in there, and just apocalyptic
proportions.
Yeah. And so a gathering, but then also in residential areas where people are in their homes with their children.
Yep.
And I've talked to folks that have told me that these terrorists were dressed as IDF, as police, comforting children while taking their parents out.
Yep. Another very important threat, I don't think I've heard anyone talking about this, but this is what I know was, for me, something I had to keep an eye out for.
Yeah.
We learned, like I said, all this information is coming in, that they are dressing like IDF soldiers,
right,
and or law enforcement,
right,
and or ambulance.
So this is what you're hearing as you're coming in.
So they're in disguise.
That they're dressed, and I've seen this in other reporting, that they're dressed like security forces.
Yes, and they were.
Okay.
And they threw us off.
Of course.
The operators.
Yeah.
Okay.
There were several similarities between the Mumbai attack and the October 7th attack. Detailed reconnaissance. Both events had attackers visiting the sites prior and had extensive knowledge of the layouts, security measures, and escape routes. Coordinated multi-site attacks. Both attacks involved coordinated assaults on multiple civilian and strategic targets to maximize chaos and impact. Use of small units. Both attacks utilized small teams of well-trained militants who could operate independently, yet in coordination. Surprise and psychological warfare. Each attack was launched with an element of surprise, exploiting perceived security weaknesses. The psychological impact was significant, with the intent to terrorize and destabilize public morale. Hostage-taking. Both events included hostage situations, which prolonged the incidents and complicated the response, drawing international attention. Firearms and explosives. Both attacks used a combination of automatic weapons, grenades, and in some cases, improvised explosive devices, IEDs, to carry out the attacks. Infiltration tactics. The Mumbai attackers came via sea, which was a less anticipated route, mirroring how the October 7th attackers used various methods like paragliders, motor vehicles, and possibly underwater approaches to breach defenses. Maximize casualties and media coverage. Both operations were designed to cause mass casualties, ensure high media coverage, and provoke a strong reaction from the targeted nations. Political and ideological statements. The attacks were not just about immediate military or tactical gains, but also served as statements of capability, defiance, and intent to further political or ideological goals.
Not going to be the same as October 7th.
Sure.
The difference is the advantage they have, it's with lessons learned from October 7th.
Yeah.
Just like we're learning lessons,
they're learning,
and they're going to tweak their strategy and tactics. So, like I said, what you're going to face, it's a whole different animal.
Yeah.
Both the operative themselves and the tactics themselves are going to be a little bit different. So you really need to start getting ahead of the curve and try to think out
100%
different scenarios.
Police stations were assaulted.
They were assaulted, and guess what's going to happen here?
Yeah.
They will take out your defenders.
Right.
Your first responders.
Yeah, first thing they're going to do.
Intelligence and security failures. Both events led to criticisms about not heeding intelligence warnings or underestimating the enemy's capabilities. Public response. After both attacks, there were public outcries for better security, changes in law enforcement strategies, and how to prevent these attacks in the future. Law enforcement weaknesses during both attacks. Lack of coordination and communication between different law enforcement agencies caused confusion and delays. Intel agencies had information about possible attacks but failed to connect the dots or take preventative measures, particularly regarding maritime threats. Some local police were inadequately equipped for counter-terrorism operations, lacking in both protective gear and training. For October 7th, the initial communication to civilians was criticized for being inadequate, leading to more confusion because they did not know where to seek safety. Common themes among both attacks. Interagency coordination. Both incidents showed that better coordination between different levels of law enforcement and even the military could significantly improve response times and effectiveness. Training and equipment. Better training for urban scenarios, as well as ensuring all levels of law enforcement have the necessary equipment. Public communication. Effective communication with the public during crises is crucial. Adapting to new threats. Both attacks forced a re-evaluation of security paradigms, particularly in how they adapted to less conventional modes of attack. By boat in Mumbai, multiple modes in Israel.
We think it's going to be a swarming attack, right? Multiple different attacks at one time across multiple cities. We think there will be suicide bombers just because some of the attackers went through suicide bomber training and they have these vests, right? And then we think there's these Fidean attackers who will carry on until they're killed. As in the United States, we haven't had Fidean attackers. You know what this is? I mean, you'll know when I explain it. If you fought in I don't know, Ramadi, Fallujah, you've seen these. So the concept is the terrorist fights to the death. So he's not exactly a suicide bomber, but he will fight till either all of us are dead or all of his people are dead, right? So this can go on for multiple days, like the plan was for Mumbai, for example.
For the individual officer, take any sort of suspicious activity desk calls seriously. Remember, prior to both attacks, extensive reconnaissance was completed. In Mumbai, extra ammo and other resources were placed at the locations prior to attack. When in doubt, complete an SAR. Ensure your gear is fitted and ready to deploy. If your plate carrier is under 3 bags, caution tape, and spike strips, it's probably not available if you have little time to retrieve it. Are you in a division with a soft target? Zoo, SeaWorld, Wild Animal Park, Snapdragon, places of worship. Have you been to these locations? Do you know other avenues of approach since secondary devices targeting first responders could be used? For supervisors, does your division have any soft target locations? If so, have you been there and met with security personnel? Ask about additional avenues of entrance-exits, surveillance room location. Understand the layout of these locations. Talk to your squad about these soft targets and how to respond. Talk about scenarios and contingencies plans for different scenarios. Touch on the need for radio discipline. Continue to recommend any trainings/podcasts/YouTube videos. Training on first aid, crowd management, evacuations, and the different roles during an event. Conduct equipment checks. Make sure your officers have their plate carriers ready to go. Talk about optional equipment that might benefit them in case of an event. When it comes to strategy, there are several things to keep in mind when an event is heard over the radio. This could be an isolated event or the beginning of multiple events at the same time. Unless specifically requested, officers need to remain in their divisions and begin to make their way to any soft target locations, stadiums, the zoo, SeaWorld, Wild Animal Park. As with any active shooter, a swift response to stop the threat as soon as possible is our top priority. Limit range of movement by attackers. One observation from prior attacks that delayed the conclusion was the amount of movement the attackers were able to get away with inside the locations. Locking down stairwells and holding ground gained is imperative to limiting movement. Resources. With the type of weapons used in past events, shields are a vital resource that needs to be provided to initial responding officers. Communication was cited in both events as a weakness. It's imperative to remain off the air for those officers giving real-time updates. If needed, use additional radio channels for requesting resources and coordinating with emergency services. Perimeter control. Establish secure perimeters around the event location to control access, contain the threat, and protect bystanders and emergency personnel. Be mindful if you are responding after initial officers are already 97, to park in such a way to provide clear access for emergency personnel. This is not intended to be the only considerations for a terrorist attack, but to remind you of the current threats and some things to be mindful of.
So I was watching this video, and it was a suicide bombing in Kabul years ago. And it was the bomber blew up, okay? And then everyone starts moving in, the first responders move in, right? And then another guy walks in and blows up. We know this is a tactic, right? But if Americans don't understand this as a tactic and don't understand these attackers are going to fight to the death, think about that. So the battle's going on, the attacker surrenders, right? He might have the suicide vest. We let our guard down. That man came to die, right? He's going to fight till he dies or you dies. So we can't let our guards down, and they know our weakness, right? So we have to be very careful that we don't have more people die in these second and third order effects of not knowing their intent.